Walmart.
CBC News has confirmed another military suicide today. This is the third apparent suicide in the Canadian Forces this week. Lieutenant Colonel Stéphane Beauchemin was found dead Thursday in Limoges, Ontario. That's just near Ottawa. He was a member of the Joint Personnel Support Unit. That's the program that provides support to ill and injured soldiers. Mr. Beauchemin was also a veteran, deployed to Haiti in '97 and Bosnia in '99. Why have there been so many military suicides in recent months? Is the government doing enough to support soldiers? This is always the question when this happens. Should there be a public inquiry into how mental illness is treated in the Canadian Forces, as the former CDS General Hillier told me on CBC Radio's The House? Joining me now in Toronto is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade, Erin O'Toole. In St. John's, the NDP National Defence Critic, Jack Harris. And in Vancouver, the Liberal National Defence Critic, Joyce Murray. Erin O'Toole, the government and DND have programs in place, but recently General Hillier, the former CDS, said there should be a national inquiry or a public inquiry into this because there's too many recent deaths and obviously something's not working. What do you say?
Well, Evan, first off, I want to pass my condolences on to the family of Lieutenant Colonel Beauchemin. These are terrible tragedies, and we have to learn from each one of them. And we also have to let veterans know that may be out there, that may be struggling, that there are supports for them. That's the challenge in these cases. Is often mental illness can lead someone to break away from their natural support units. Here's a senior officer who's involved in helping our people and knows there are supports, but you have to recognize that you need to reach out. But as General Lawson, the CDS, said earlier this year, it's also up to the unit, the family, and the people around our serving members in the forces and our veterans to plug them into programs and not let them feel isolated. So, look, any death like this is an absolute tragedy, and we have to learn from it. And we have been moving considerable resources in recent years, opening operational stress injury clinics, 17 of them across the country, the personnel support centers, 24 of them across the country. We're hiring mental health workers. In fact,
that's taken time. You and I both, you've had this conversation. Unfortunately, we keep having this conversation, and every time there's a suicide, the same statistics come out. The government says they'll hire mental health workers. We've seen reports say that that hasn't gone quickly enough, and in the meantime, these tragedies keep happening. Something's got to change here, obviously, because there seems to be, I think this is the 8th suicide. Can the military confirm how many there have been in the last 2 months?
Well, listen, Evan, I try and talk about my experience in the military and my work with veterans before running for Parliament. And look, the NDP put a release out on this today. In many ways, I agree with one part of that release, which is I'd like to see the National Defence broadly issue its investigations and find conclusions in relation to some of the investigations they do faster. I know the veterans in our caucus, and we have many, have been pushing to hire to fill that mental health professional gap, because we've actually earmarked funds to hire more, yet these skills are in demand, and it's also hard to get some of these professionals to some of the isolated bases that we have across the country. So we need to think better. We need to get these people hired, fill that gap. But at the same time, Evan, that's why I have to say there are supports out there, both in the military and in the charitable sector, that if veterans feel isolated at risk, they have to know we're there for them, and we have to do better.
Just real quick, on a yes or no, do you support Rick Hillier's suggestion made on CBC Radio's The House that there should be a national inquiry into what's going on with the suicides?
Well, Ivan, you asked me this once before, and I have a lot of respect for Rick Hillier. In fact, he inspired many of us to form the True Patriot Love Foundation back in 2009 to support veterans and military families. But I don't like that course of action, because often those royal commissions and inquiries push the problem down the road. That's why I'm glad you're actually airing this out on your program. That's why I'm at an event this week being hosted by a veterans group called Treble Victor that are actually going to be bringing together advocates and raising funds for mental health. So we've got to talk about it. Rick Hillier's voice is a critical one, but I don't necessarily see the tool of one of these royal commissions addressing something quickly, and that's what we have to do.
Jack Harris, what's your reaction on what has to happen here?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's very sad to be here once again expressing our profound condolences to a member of the Armed Forces, this time a Lieutenant Colonel, and his family and loved ones for having lost his life in this way. And it's not enough. And I don't want to, I suppose I could accuse Aaron of blaming the victim here, saying that they should know that there's services available. The problem is that they're not. And one thing about what Rick Hillier is saying, at least he's acknowledging that there's a crisis and there has to be a solution. This government, I'm afraid, is not prepared to acknowledge that the status quo isn't working. They're saying that the supports are there, etc. Soldiers just must use them. But you know, when you've got the Canadian Forces Ombudsman, Pierre Daigle, saying early in December that there's 76 mental health professionals ready to be put in place, but nothing has happened for bureaucratic reasons. And then by the 10th of January, the report was that only one social worker, one nurse, and one psychiatrist had been put in place. This is, you know, it looks to me that this is not being taken with the, considered with the urgency that it deserves. And secondly, when, you know, as Aaron even agrees with this, and we've got a list of 50 suicides going back as far as 2008 with boards of inquiry which are supposed to find out what went wrong and what could be done to fix it, and they haven't reported yet. I mean, there's obviously a sense of urgency lacking here, and maybe Aaron's right. If you have a Royal Commission, it could be a year or two before the report. But if the Prime Minister and our leaders asked him to do this, acknowledge that we have a crisis, take it as a personal priority for him and his government, and get this stuff done before we have more and more programs like this where we're talking yet again about the same problems that haven't been addressed.
Okay, let me bring in Joyce Murray. What's your reaction on what has to happen?
Well, Evan, like my colleagues, very sad to hear about Lieutenant Colonel Beauchemin's passing, and I want to express my condolences and those of the Liberal Party and other Canadians to his family and friends. When I hear Aaron talking about pushing, he doesn't like the idea of an inquiry because it pushes this down the road. Well, this government is pushing this down the road, and one way is the cutting of funding, and it's that cutting of funding that is also contributing to the lack of military professionals in psychiatry and psychology, the unavailability of people to help. And Evan, I want to draw to your attention. I may have mentioned this before on your show. This is a study done by the Standing Committee on National Defense in June 2009, and it was on PTSD. So it has some very, very specific recommendations on just the things Aaron was talking about when he says it's difficult to get medical professionals and into remote locations. There are 36 recommendations, including specific recommendations for how to solve that. And I have to say that when you have a life-saving recommendations and the government has failed to implement them, does not even have a review of these recommendations and where they're at, then they are not taking, this Prime Minister and this government is not taking this issue seriously, and that's just not good enough. Okay,
I got about 30 seconds. I just want to mention that the Joint Personnel Support Unit, which was set up 5 years ago, was supposed to support physically and mentally injured soldiers coming back from Afghanistan, and actually Lieutenant Colonel Stéphane Beauchemin was assigned there. But Michael Blaise is the president of the Canadian Veterans Advocacy, and here's part of a statement he sent to us on what the Minister of National Defence and the Chief of the Defence Staff can do. Quote, "We encourage each to demonstrate leadership at their respective levels to ensure that the unit D&D created to provide services to the wounded," this is the JPSU I just mentioned, "is fully manned with military and civilian personnel capable of providing the expedient level of care Canada's physically, mentally wounded so richly deserve." I have 10 seconds here. Mr. O'Toole, is the Joint Personnel Support Unit, does it need resources? Will it get more resources?
We are expanding the Joint Personnel Support Units, as well as I said, the Operational Stress Injury Clinics, because that's really the epicenter of mental health challenges. And I have to address, some of what Joyce said, Evan. Incorrect, actually. Veterans Affairs funding has increased on average $700 million a year. this is not just about numbers. I agreed with something that Jack's party put out today. We've got to take the politics out of this. We've got to work towards solutions that help quickly, but we also have to recognize that we are trying to address these issues, and we actually have more mental health professionals than our NATO allies. It's really about making sure we have programs that fit the needs of our soldiers, not just in urban centers, but in remote centers, and have the training for military leadership and veterans leadership to recognize signs in people that may not admit they are having thoughts like this.
Well, I don't know what the solution is. We do know the tragic news today, and this is a story we continue to cover, unfortunately, because the real question is how many and will there be more? Aaron O'Toole, Jack Harris, Joyce Murray, thanks for joining us tonight. Of course, we all hope and pray there are no more, but it's an issue we keep having to come back to. I appreciate your time tonight.